Let's start with a big idea. The number one reason for dying sales, it's not competition, it's not your price. It's actually a silent internal system failure, known as friction. Today, we are not talking about the usual marketing tricks or some new persuasion tactic. No, we are exploring a precise diagnostic system, a surgical approach that's designed to find and remove the invisible obstacles that are just silently killing your growth. We're going to learn how to conduct a friction audit. And this idea, right here, it changes everything because it totally reframes the problem. See, when sales are down, our first instinct is to look for enemies outside the building. Competitors, pricing, market trends, you name it. We assume we need a flashier ad or maybe a better offer. But this quote, it forces us to look inward. It argues that the real culprit is something we built into our own systems, an internal resistance that makes it hard for motivated customers to do what they already want to do. And it's a silent killer, right? Because customers rarely email you to say, hey, your checkout form is confusing. They don't complain, they just vanish. All right, so here's our surgical plan for today. First, we're going to properly identify this silent killer. Then we'll get into the crisis that made this whole diagnostic tool necessary in the first place, and the scientific model it's all built on. From there, we'll walk through the core 4-step diagnosis itself. Then we'll dive into the psychology of why this thing is so effective, move from theory to actual practice, and wrap up with the most powerful insight of all, the power of subtraction. Okay, section 1, the silent killer. Here, our job is to pinpoint the real cause of those frustratingly high drop-off rates. And the first step is to stop blaming the customer and start looking at the system we've built ourselves. And this brings us to what I call the great paradox of conversion optimization. So imagine this. You see a huge drop-off rate on your payment page. The typical reaction? We start looking for external causes. We ask, did a competitor launch a sale? Is our pricing wrong? Was the ad misleading? We frantically search for some outside enemy. But the truth is, while we're looking out there, the problem is usually a tangled mess right inside our own process. A confusing field label, a button that doesn't work on a phone, a hidden shipping fee. The resistance is baked right into our own user experience. The failure is internal. Now, this intense focus on internal systems didn't just appear out of thin air. That brings us to section 2, the crisis and the model. See, this diagnostic tool wasn't just some clever idea. It was forged out of pure necessity, a direct response to some serious economic pressure. And the catalyst was simple, the skyrocketing cost of acquiring a new customer. As ad costs just kept going up and up, it got more and more expensive just to get a potential buyer to your front door. Think of it like this. You're spending a fortune to pour money and potential customers into one end of a pipe. But that pipe is full of cracks, confusing forms, slow-loading pages, unclear instructions. Every single customer who leaks out isn't just a lost sale, it's a direct financial loss on the money you spent to get them there in the first place. This leakage from high-friction workflows just became unaffordable, and it demanded a new, much more precise way to patch the holes. And this is where science gives us the perfect framework. The engine of the friction audit is Dr. B.J. Fogg's behavior model. It lays out a really profound equation. For any behavior to happen, 3 things have to converge at the exact same moment: motivation, ability, and a prompt. So think about ordering a pizza. Your motivation is hunger. The prompt is an ad you see. But your ability, well, that's how easy the app is to use. If you have to create some complex password and enter your address 3 times, your ability is low and you're just going to give up. Most marketing focuses on cranking up the motivation, making you hungrier. But that's really expensive and hard to do. The friction audit takes a much smarter path. It focuses relentlessly on that ability part. By making the task as easy as possible, by minimizing friction, the behavior becomes almost inevitable, even if someone's motivation is just kind of average. And that is the crucial insight. So, how do we actually apply this intense focus on ability? Well, that brings us to the core mechanism of the audit itself. Section 3, the 4-step diagnosis. And I want to be clear, this isn't guesswork. It's a repeatable, surgical procedure designed to find friction and deliver a very precise cure. The process is actually pretty elegant in its structure. It's made up of 4 distinct steps. First, you map the pain. This is the detective phase, where you find exactly where users are struggling and dropping off. Second, you diagnose the type. You have to categorize the friction. Is it confusion? Is it effort? Or is it anxiety? Third, and this part is absolutely critical, you quantify the loss. You attach a real dollar amount to the problem so you can understand its impact on the business. And finally, you mitigate the cause. This is where you implement the precise surgical fix based on your diagnosis. So let's break each of these down. Step 1 is mapping the pain, and this is all about observation, not assumption. For years, we've been relying on metrics like bounce rate, which tells us that people left, but it never tells us why. This step goes so much deeper. We use tools like session recordings to watch anonymized user sessions, almost like we're looking right over their shoulder. We can see where their mouse hovers in confusion, where they rage-click a broken button in frustration, and at what exact form field they finally give up and leave. We're not just looking at a spreadsheet here, we are finding the precise location of the wound. But look, finding where the pain is, that's not enough. A doctor can't just know that your leg hurts. They need to know if it's a broken bone, a muscle strain, or a nerve issue, because the treatment for each is completely different, right? It's the exact same thing here. After finding that precise moment of drop-off, the most critical question we have to ask is why? What specific type of friction is causing this failure? And this right here provides the diagnostic categories. And believe me, getting this right is everything. There are 3 distinct types of friction. First up, you have cognitive friction. This is just mental effort or confusion. Think of industry jargon a customer doesn't get, or a button with a vague label. The cure, as you can see, is clarity. Second, there's procedural friction. This is all about physical effort. It's too many form fields to fill out, way too many clicks to get to the end, or making someone re-enter their shipping address. The cure here is simplicity. And finally, there's emotional friction. This is anxiety and distrust. Is the website designed from 1998? Are you asking for a phone number without explaining why? This creates fear, and the cure for that is trust. A correct diagnosis of which of these 3 is the real problem is absolutely essential. So once we've diagnosed the type of friction, we move to step 3, quantify the loss. Now, this is the step that gets you the budget and the buy-in to actually make a change, because it translates a user experience problem into the language everyone in business understands: money. You calculate the direct financial impact. For example, if 10,000 users a month abandon a checkout page with an average order value of, say, $100, that single friction point is costing the business $1.2 million in lost potential revenue every single year. When you put a number like that on the table, it stops being a minor website issue and it becomes a critical business priority that absolutely demands to be fixed. And that brings us to step 4, mitigate the cause. This is where the surgery happens. Based on your specific diagnosis, you apply the precise fix. So if the problem was procedural friction from an unnecessary form field, you don't redesign the whole page, you just remove that one field. If it was cognitive friction from an unclear headline, you just rewrite the headline for clarity. It's targeted. And crucially, you don't just hope it works. You implement the fix and then you verify the results, measuring the actual lift in conversion to prove, with data, that your diagnosis was correct and the treatment was effective. So we've just walked through the 4-step process. But why is focusing on friction so incredibly effective? Well, that brings us to section 4, the aversion to effort. We need to get into the deep-seated psychological principles that really make this whole system so powerful. Okay, the fundamental assumption of the friction audit is both humbling and brilliant. It assumes that on any given day, a user's motivation is low, it's fickle, and it just can't be relied upon. So instead of trying to do the impossible, change human nature, it does something so much more achievable. It changes the task for the user. It's like, instead of trying to force someone through a solid wall, you simply build them a door. You just make the desired action easier to perform. You're working with human nature, not against it. This chart really illustrates that trade-off perfectly. Over on the left, you have a user with low motivation. They're just browsing. They will only complete that purchase if the process is incredibly easy. That is, if their ability is high because friction is super low. The moment they hit a confusing step, poof, they're gone. Now look at the right. This is a highly motivated user. They desperately need your product. But here's the thing, even they can fail if the friction is too high. A buggy payment form, a lost password they can't reset. The takeaway here is crystal clear. The only reliable path to success for all your customers is to maximize their ability by creating a low-friction experience. So, to kind of sum up the psychology here, the friction audit works because it leverages 4 core human behaviors. First, our deep-seated aversion to effort. We are biologically wired to take the path of least resistance. Second, it compensates for low motivation, making tasks so easy that even casual interest can lead to a conversion. Third, it mitigates loss aversion. A short, simple process means users don't feel like they've wasted a bunch of time if they decide to leave. And finally, and this is so important, it correctly decodes abandonment. It's not a failure of the user's intent to buy. It's a failure of our system to give them the ability to finish. All right, so this brings us to the application. Section 5, from theory to practice. How do you actually apply this audit in the real world to get the absolute maximum return on your investment? To really master this, there are 3 guiding principles you gotta follow. First, map the path of pain. This means you don't just look at a spreadsheet of drop-off rates. You have to watch those session recordings to visually confirm where the struggle is really happening. Assumptions are your enemy here. Second, separate the friction types. You must be a precise diagnostician. Don't just say the form is confusing. Ask yourself, is this a clarity problem, a simplicity problem, or a trust problem? The wrong diagnosis leads to the wrong cure. And third, prioritize by loss potential. Use that financial calculation from step 3 to focus your limited resources only on the fixes that will stop the biggest financial leaks and give you the highest ROI. This quote just nails the importance of diagnosis. The wrong fix applied to the wrong friction type is a waste. I mean, it's the business equivalent of putting a cast on a strained muscle. If your users are dropping off because they're confused by your terminology, that's cognitive friction. Then removing form fields, which is a fix for procedural friction, is not going to solve the core problem. You'll have just wasted time and resources. An accurate diagnosis isn't just important, it's the only way to guarantee your efforts will actually produce results. And this brings us to our final section, and honestly, the most profound insight of this entire process. Section 6, the power of subtraction. This represents a fundamental shift in how we typically think about achieving growth. Here is the ultimate insight. Conversion is a function of flow, not force. You simply can't force a user through a process they find difficult or confusing. Your goal isn't to push harder. Your goal is to clear the path of all the debris so they can flow effortlessly towards the solution they are already looking for. And this is why a successful friction audit rarely results in adding more features or more text or more pop-ups. It almost always results in the thoughtful elimination of steps, words, and effort. Real growth comes from subtraction. And that right there is the ultimate takeaway. The best marketing, the best user experience, it doesn't push people through a funnel, it pulls them toward value. It feels like a helping hand, just making the path to a solution effortless. By systematically removing friction, you take a complex, anxiety-inducing decision and you completely transform it. You make the hardest choice a customer has to make, the choice to trust, to buy, to commit, the easiest one they'll make all day. And that is the true power of the friction audit.